Goddard. And I can't remember. I'm going to let you tell everybody a little bit about yourself so I don't get it wrong. So my apologies. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christine. I appreciate that. Yeah, so hello, everybody. My name is Orson John. I work within our reliability and risk assessment branch, and it's primarily under our safety and mission assurance organization or directorate, in which we support flight projects across the board, are developed and managed out of Goddard, NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. And the main facility that I work is in Greenbelt, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. And so with that, welcome to this evening's project management workshop and overview. So I want to thank you, thank you, Christine, and thank you everybody for joining and giving your attention this evening. So I am going to share my screen. I did put together utilize last year's PowerPoint presentation that was heavily developed by Dr. Juan Ramon, who is the deputy director at Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. And Dr. Juan Ramon is really the deputy director over our entire engineering organization as a whole. And last year we had the opportunity to co-present, and I want to heavily credit a lot of the material that is given tonight to Dr. Ramon and how he has offered that and how we have given the privilege to kind of tailor that towards First Nations launch. And so tonight, I just want to emphasize a little bit more how we can apply the tools that project managers can adapt, and especially managing projects such as First Nations launch and a development through that whole project, how they can utilize the tools that project managers use and how we can apply those tools to the development of the First Nations launch and the Moon Challenge. So this evening, Goddard, I just want to briefly touch that Goddard Space Flight Center. We do a lot of work in teams. We do a lot of work through projects. We do a lot of work through the development of projects that are geared towards having a common goal. And a lot of these goals, a lot of the teams that we work with, they're interdependent, meaning that there are a lot of people that utilize they provide the necessary skill set to work together. And all of our projects are time-based. Some of them are mission essential, which means that any projects we are launching, sometimes they may have a strict timeline. They may be constrained to within budget constraints and budget costs. So projects within that and utilizing and defining those criteria and those boundaries that projects are developed within, projects have to be planned, they must be organized, they must be implemented, and they must be controlled. And so the art of planning them, organizing them, implementing them, and more or less controlling some projects, I would say that's the art of project management. Because project management, we start with a project that has a start date, that has an end date, and produces a product. And project management in that field and within that context can be both an art and a science. As a science, it is foundational for the art of leadership because you're working with individuals, you're working with people, you're working with teams. You're just not learning you're not just developed in one scientific area or one technical discipline, but you also complement that with leading and managing and working with people. So a good project manager, or maybe I would say a good team leader, can offer that and implement that and demonstrate that with a vision, motivate others, and to coordinate people to achieve the objectives. So for FNL, for First Nations launch, it would primarily be a team leader or the primary student that is organizing the entire team. That team leader should, I would recommend, implement some of the tools that are given within this workshop and implement some of the tools that project managers use, because the project management workshop is just offering principles and foundational areas that can be applied to small projects. So the team lead will need to define the vision, the mission, right, the motivation, and just coordinate people to meet the objectives. And this year, I believe the objective is the Moon Engineering Challenge. So, at NASA, the way we do things and the way project management is developed and the way project management is applied to satellite developments or instrumentation developments or ground systems that support NASA missions, they are broken up into phases. And I won't go into great detail with the diagram that is presented, but I just want to give you an overall picture of how these phases have, the project is broken up into phases. And within each phase, there are specific criteria and expectations that fall within the boundary of those phases. So if you go from the upper left of that circle in the middle, maybe the 11 a.m. portion, and you go towards the right and you go clockwise down to the bottom towards, let's say, 5 p.m., you can see how the mission phases progress, going from pre-phase A or phase A to B to C. And within each phase, there's different activities that support what is happening within that time frame. And taking that from that visual perspective, and let's say putting it down into a presentation perspective, one of the things that we can visualize this as just a chart, right? Where on the far left, you have a phase. Again, you have a start date, and then you have an end date. And within those beginning portions or those time-defined moments, these are phases. And within each phases, you have a set of criteria that is utilized within those areas. And so for FNL, we may take this concept to say, okay, then what is phase A, or what is phase B, and what is phase C? I won't go into great detail on this, but I just want to give you a visual perspective that as a team leader, as a team manager, or as a team project lead, visualizing from the very beginning and getting involved within First Nations launch. It's good practice to develop this and to illustrate this in a timeline perspective, that we are starting with a beginning and we are ending with something. We are going to end with a successful launch. That's right. And so how do you outline those? Well, you can outline those as phases that, as Aaron had presented in the previous workshop, your proposal. And then what comes after your proposal? Well, you may go into your preliminary design as a team to develop concepts. And what is the end product within that particular area? What is the end product for that particular phase? That would be your preliminary design report. That would be your preliminary design presentations, or your PDR reports and PDR presentations. And then you go from there. After you finalize and develop your preliminary design concepts, then you start to finalize your design. And that is where your critical design reports and your CDR presentations come into play, how you solidify that design and say, okay, then we've made a selection. This is the best design that we are moving forward with to meet the objective. Then you can transition into phase D, where you can start to assemble, where you can start to cut the pieces, so to speak, where you can start to cut the metal and piece together and assemble your rocket. And so for FNL, it's wise to begin this process, especially at this point in time in this program, where you have the opportunity to understand what is needed at each phase. And the student handbook that you have, that is given to all the participants, that is made available on the websites, this is a resource to help you, guide you along the way. And it helps you to visualize where a project can be developed as we progress moving forward, so that you will have a successful launch. But not only have a successful launch, but you develop the tools and the technical capabilities to learn and implement working with teams, implement areas to apply technical writing, presentation skills. And so it's just not launching a rocket, but there's also that technical aspect that complements that entire process. And that's what project management and managing as a team leader can offer the entire team. For this particular workshop, there are some terminologies that I will mention. I will mention task, I will mention activity, I will mention sequence, and I will mention milestone. A task would be I would say a higher level activity, and that activity can be the smaller steps to make that task complete. A sequence or a logic is basically the order of activities that need to take place in order to produce a task, in order to produce a product. And a milestone is just the gate, or the moment in which you will present. And for all of us, that are participating in this program, the milestones are defined as your proposals, your preliminary design reviews, your critical design reviews, your flight readiness reviews, um, your post-launch, the reports that are due. I won't go into much detail, and moving forward, there's going to be some overlap with a lot of the terminology, but I think that it's important for us to see how these can apply, especially early in the beginning, in the middle of your project, but also at the end of your project. And there's going to be some overlap with some terminologies, but the reason there's overlap is because these are important tools and applications that you can apply through that entire engineering development phase. So a schedule, right? A schedule is important because a schedule is essentially a tool. It's essentially a tool that helps identify what the team intends to do and when they need to do it. How a schedule functions, well, it develops and integrates smaller tasks and activities into a logical flow. It establishes a timetable for achieving objectives. It helps identify work priorities. It supports the development of your costs and your resources, where you can allocate your funds and where you can allocate and utilize the resources. It provides a means to measure work accomplishments, and it helps identify problems early. So developing a credible schedule is critical for any project manager. Is essential for any team leader that is developing and working on a project. Well, what does this mean for First Nations launch? Well, what is the First Nations launch objective? You want to successfully complete the Moon Challenge. You want to successfully have and launch a rocket, complete the task, and retrieve it successfully. And how do you identify those functions? Well, as developing a schedule for the First Nations launch, you identify your requirements. You identify what is needed from you to produce this product, what is needed from you. So you will need teams, right? You will need team members. You will need a faculty advisor. You will need a budget. And so developing a schedule is key for managing, I would say, a successful project such as First Nations launch. You identify subsystem tasks and activities. I will go into a little bit more detail later on in the presentation, but you identify what is needed during that entire development process. You establish a timetable for achieving these objectives, right? You look at the calendar and you look at when the milestone reviews are due. You look at how your activities are going to play out, whether they're done in weeks, whether they're done in months, whether they're done in a few hours. And you set your priorities. And so as a team leader working now, and you identify team members, well, you can start to put together your schedule. When is your team members available? Maybe some team members are full-time students and some are working part-time jobs, or some are working full-time and are working part-time. Maybe some have families and they have other priorities outside of FNL. But as a team leader, once you start to develop the purpose and utilize the tools such as a schedule, you'll be able to integrate where you can best supply resources. That's such as time availability for your team members to be involved. And so getting a head start on schedules and working with your teams to establish availability is important, because we know that working within this current environment that we are, having availability to work and scheduling priorities is essential. You can develop a cost and estimate a resource plan for your entire development. And this will help you along the way because it helps identify problems early. It helps identify scheduling conflicts. It helps identify solutions to overcome those conflicts. It helps identify what items are needed to be ordered and what is needed to receive that product. There may be, I know that all of us at some point are facing the mail, like, the delayed response in delivery for mailed items. Taking those into consideration, as a schedule, you can develop this as a tool to help you along the way. Planning a project and creating the schedule, well, what is the first things you got to do? You got to first gather the information. You got to first set the goals, the objectives. You list a task. You estimate the time that is needed for the completion of these tasks. You determine what orders are needed and what first steps are taken, and then the follow-on steps. And then just in general, like I mentioned, you set up calendars. For FNL, this is specific because your competition requirements and your deliverables are found within your student handbook. So a lot of the work is given there. A lot of the work that you are looking for is outlined within that handbook. So you have set objectives, you set the goals, and you help set up calendars to meet those, right? So basically you have a general idea of when your PDR is due, when your reports are due, when your presentations are due. This will help you identify and set up a calendar that will help you along the way to develop the tasks that are needed to meet those objectives, your presentation and your reports. What are the key requirements for your vehicle? What are the key requirements for your payload? And so at each milestone, you'll be able to identify what is needed within that particular phase. And you outline the steps needed to accomplish that task. And you do this by assigning resources. You identify resources that can help you have a successful development of a launch vehicle. So within that, right, you identify milestones. I mentioned earlier that a general definition of the milestones for FNL is really the key decision points that are made for you to progress moving forward. That key decision point is presented to the FNL judges, the FNL stakeholders, the entire First Nations launch program, right? You as teams, you present to them because those are your stakeholders. These are people you are being held accountable to so that they can see that you are ready to proceed moving forward. And so for FNL, you identify those milestones. You identify when your proposals are due. You identify when your presentations are due. You identify and utilize the handbook. Within that handbook, you can identify and define what is needed for each gate, what is needed for your proposal. You define what the criteria, you define the expectations. For your PDR in advance, you can identify the criteria and the expectations that are needed to complete a successful PDR report and a successful PDR presentation. You know when the deadlines are, right? And then you can document your progress along the way. How are you meeting the objectives, right? Are you maintaining accountability for each task? Are you managing your teams, and are your teams being held accountable to some of the activities that are required for each particular milestone? And I would encourage you as a project manager or as a team leader that even members within your team to go through the student handbook and learn when those deadlines are due, learn what is the criteria and the expectations, so that as you progress moving forward, as you set your schedule and you progress moving forward, you know what is expected of you, you know what is expected of your team, so that when it comes time for reports, when it comes time for presentations, you are well versed within this area, and you'll be able to present effectively. That really goes into much detail about defining what your project is and what the challenge is. Once you identify the criteria and the expectations for each milestone, then you can identify what is expected of you within that particular time period. So if you're going into PDR or you're going into CDR, you know the expectations that are required of you. And so this is where you can start to get into a little bit more detail and of identifying and breaking up tasks and activities. You create a list of tasks or what are needed. Do you utilize experienced staff to plan the project? Do you identify the activities that are needed to support that task, to make that task a product that can be given, right, or reported? What are the characteristics to complete that task? You know, precision and detail. At what level of detail do you need to go into? So when you're, you know, for me being, Christine had mentioned that I am a level 1 certified, so I'm level 1 certified, and learning through the development of building a rocket kit, you know, there's a lot of little things that I wasn't aware of, right? And so as a team, if I was to go ahead and purchase a new kit and I was to go through that entire build process, well, I need to be aware of little things that I'm accomplishing and how long it's going to take. Where are my resources am I going to do? Am I just going to clear my office desk and build my rocket here without considering that, hey, I need to use this office desk for other work? So helping a schedule and defining your task will help you identify just not the build of your product, but how it affects everything else. So defining task and understanding what it needs to take to build that particular product. That's what a schedule does. That's what team management can do for you, so that you can have a product that is able to be successful within the criteria and the expectations that are given within the student handbook. Estimating task, determining how long it's going to take. Consider realistic estimates, right? Consider that, hey, I just have a full day to do it. Well, maybe not take a full day. What is defined as a full day? Do you have 8 hours, 12 hours to complete it? Are you working within the work-life balance, where your work and your school and your home life, what is the realistic time frame that you can allocate to the writing your report? Considering these upfront will help you evaluate what is needed to support all the subsystems within the development of your rocket, within the development of every aspect, right? Some of the students that have presented in the past that I am aware of, they were phenomenal in the graphics and the artist work, but it took some time for them to make their kit presentable. Do you take that into consideration when you're developing your task? Absolutely, absolutely. But you also got to understand everything else that is involved with understanding that build process. I have a picture there, figure 6.1 in the lower right, that identifies the stability, right? Identifying terminology within the teams is essential. So, it's breaking out time to start researching and understanding the terminology and what it means, so that when you actually identify the criteria and the expectations for a milestone, for a PDR or for a CDR, your team is well versed in the terminology. Your team is well versed in what is happening. Why? Because you've allocated resources. You determine that the task that is needed, I want my team to be well versed in the product. So we're going to set aside some time to go through this development. We're going to go through this and understand this. I know that simulations is a big one. If you are not familiar with the simulations, and I do believe that last year there was a workshop on the simulations. If you are not well versed in it, allocate some resources and consider the task complexity, the last bullet on the lower left. If you still need to take some time to develop your area within this field, within this program, define that and take and realistically understand that we are all on a learning curve, and allocating what it needs to take to produce a product that is needed to meet the expectations for each milestone. That's what estimating a task is. It helps you identify what is needed to develop and produce something at a subsystem level or even the entire system level. And in the upper right, I have structures, systems, and materials. And you look at that, all the makeup of entire rocket kit, right? And some of the terminology. So these could be sequences that you develop, right? These will be tasks that you develop. Your airframes and your couplers, your motor tubes, your retainers, right? The fins, the rail buttons, these will be all major tasks that may need to be accomplished. And within those tasks, what are the activities to produce that? Sequencing, what steps are needed in order to complete it, right? What steps are needed in order to complete each task? And so sequencing task is really dependent upon getting there may be something that needs to be done first before you can move forward. And I had to learn that through the workshop that FNL produced, that there is just some things that need to be complete during the entire build process in order for you to proceed moving forward. And so consider those, right? You document that. The one on the lower right, the diagram on the far right, you have the main frame, which is great, but at the bottom, you have an Excel or a table that identifies each component. And on the far right, it may be hard to see, but on the far right, you have a status. And so, you sequence what is needed first, you sequence what is needed, what can be done in parallel, what needs to be done last, and you check mark, okay, then where am I at? This may take a lot of responsibility and a lot of diligence and a lot of discipline, but it helps because you're applying tools that can just not only be applied for FNL, but across your entire school studies. So what task may be finished before or another? And how are these tasks related? How are these tasks interdependent upon one another? So that when you come to FNL on launch day, you're not disassembling your entire rocket kit, and trying to put it together at the very last minute. Why? Because up front, you developed a process. You applied some of the tools that our project manager utilizes for an entire project, and you start to develop those early because you're starting to look at it from a project perspective. You're looking at it from a higher level, and then from a higher level, you'll be able to identify what areas are important, what areas are needed, and what criteria is needed within those particular areas. This really brings to allocating and assigning resources, right? You are working as a team. This is not a one-person show, but you are working as a team. So assigning people, what is your equipment? What is the cost? Who will be the point of contact? Who will be doing the task? When are they needed? Resource requirement considerations, right? Do you have the facilities? Do you have the location? Do you have the necessary ventilation processes when you paint your rocket or when you go through your gluing process? Do you have the resources available? Do you have the skill sets required? Does that mean that you may need to reach out to consultants such as the mentors or advisors, right? FNL advisors or even your faculty advisors. There may be somebody within your team that is experienced because they've participated in past programs. So you may utilize and hear them out first to understand, hey, maybe they're best served within this area, and I want to allow them to be developed in this area so that they can start working on it. Team schedules, I mentioned resource requirements, team schedules. That one, I put it here again because it's important for, I would say, any member to be well aware of where priorities lie. School priorities, work-life priorities, home priorities, and where FNL falls in within those priorities. And so knowing upfront what the realistic time frame is for an individual to support going through the entire reporting process and going through the entire build process and simulation process, knowing these upfront helps identify where you can start to assign resources and utilize people that have strengths, right? Types of other resources, right? You consider equipment, estimating costs and consideration, having a budget. I know that tools and tips within the FNL website, there is a template for a budget, an example of a budget. So there are resources out there. There are resources that are readily available for any member that is going through this process, right? FNL does a fantastic job providing such resources and documenting these resources. So understanding that there are tools that are out there to help you along the way. And going into a little bit more detail with schedules, Why plan? It's time consuming, but it helps. It's critical. It's a tool that helps is all I'm saying. It's a tool that helps you along the way. It's a critical component. And so knowing your target deadlines and putting that as a framework and overall schedule can help you keep you along the way saying, oh, wow, there's only 4 weeks left until my next report. And what are the activities that I need to do within the next 4 weeks? Realistically, 4 weeks may only turn into 3 days because within those 4 weeks, you have other priorities. And you may only have 3 full working days to complete that task. I mean, that's a drastic example, but looking at it from that perspective can help. Looking at it from that perspective can offer you an opportunity to look at what is important moving forward. Know in advance what is needed. That is essential. That is critical. As FNL is an engineering challenge, one of the things that I'm well aware of engineers, working with engineers every day, is Technical writing is an important part of engineering. So knowing in advance what is needed, understanding what is the criteria and the expectations at each milestone is important. FNL have a complete overview of all activities and understand the basics of rocketry, right? Know the handbook. There's other rocketry resources that are available, the tools and tips website that I said. I believe that NASA has the model rocketry example that is given on the FNL website. So these are tools to help you identify objectives, assumptions. It helps you identify tasks and what steps are needed just for you to be available to allocate resources where they are needed. To plan ahead and identify steps early to determine reasonable schedules. I have mentioned this several times. Team progress, right? You keep the schedule updated. This is just not a one-time document, but you update it constantly. You check in with each member of your team to say, you know, are there anything that is coming up that I need to be well aware of so that we can work together? One of the things that I've learned working on teams is if I don't check in with them and there's something that is required of them and it's not done, that team member may just, you know, I can't do it, and they just might jump off. But as a team leader or a project manager, one of the fundamental things that I can do as is to check in with my members so that I can allocate, like, okay, then I understand that we weren't able to do this. You weren't able to complete it right now, but let me take this and let me assign it. I don't want you to leave yet, but I want to work around your schedule. I want to allocate resources where they are needed. And then having accountability, right? Utilizing your faculty, utilizing accountability, include all internal and external critical milestones, taking those into consideration, right? I do believe that there are members out here that are there for you to guide you along the way. Ensure the objectives are accomplished, right? Follow the handbook milestone guidelines. Utilize the tools that are being taught within your studies. That's an important one. If you're taking an English course, you're taking a math course, right? You can understand what you are learning within those classes and apply those to your reports. You're going through a technical writing class. You can apply the tools that you are learning and apply those to your reports. All your units are consistent. All the definition and requirements that are needed within your report are clearly defined. There is no copy and paste from the report, right? So you're taking the time to develop this and you're applying. Why? Because you've allowed to yourself to set a schedule. You've allowed yourself to allocate resources where they are needed. You've allowed to, you were able to identify the time frame that is needed, and you were able to work together because you were able to see from an overall perspective. You were able to manage the project early, get a good start, know the objectives, know the criteria, and able to set the tasks and activities needed within those areas. And so an example, your schedule doesn't need to be fancy, doesn't need to have all of these graphics in there, but it could be as simple as even going through a planner, right? Where everybody has that access to it, where they can see. An example of a top level schedule. You see the blue lines of the rows, row 6 and row 11, if you can see them, is in the light blue. There's phase 1 and phase 2. And within phase 1, you have task 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, these may be different tasks that you identify, and it helps you along the way to progress a calendar on the far right. And so this was from Excel. This was a template in Excel. So there are tools out there that help you not to start from scratch, but just help you develop how you can start to look at a schedule and how you can tailor that, how one can tailor that for your specific project. And that's what project management is, right? It's managing that. It's offering the platform to identify areas to produce a product. And how you identify those areas, well, you may need to plan, you may need to schedule, you may need to set boundaries within those guidelines because you know that there's expectations that are needed of you or needed of the project, and you're able to, working all of those together, you're able to produce a product. And the biggest thing that it helps with is identifying issues, problems, risk, but also opportunities. You know, you may have scheduled that it may take 2 weeks to do a certain task. And then all of a sudden your team just stepped up and you've completed that task. Well, that allocated that, you know, the extra time to where you can start to move your schedule around and your sequencing starts to begin because you've completed a task early and you can start to move around and you can start to allocate resources where they are needed. So risk management is a big one because when you can identify a schedule, it can help identify planning for the quote unquote bad things or the challenges is really what it is that may occur. Time constraints is a challenge, right? Ordering parts may be a challenge. Finding funds and allocating those funds or identifying a facility. Does the facility have all the necessary equipment that I need? Issue management, right? Addressing the events that have occurred, right? So how do you manage and how do you offer those solutions to minimize the problem from occurring? Opportunity management, I just mentioned that one. Seeking good things that may benefit, right? Completing tasks early may help you complete the task overall and will be able to help move the project forward. And so these are just, I would say at a very high level, this was just a very high level overview of what project management is, some of the principles that are embedded in project management, very general, and how some of those tools can be applied to your project, can be applied to the development of your rocket kit, can be applied to the development of your payload, can be applied to development of your recovery system, right? So I just named three main, I would say, tasks, and two main tasks: the recovery, the payload. So, you know, those are two main tasks that to support the entire development. And so what you can do to meet those objectives can help you along the way. And there are, I remember last year that Dr. Ramon and he had offered a lot of, he had offered some tools and collaboration tools. And I've kept these in the presentation because I felt that it was important and it, you know, it warrants us to discuss or just briefly mention here that Google is a nice platform. Anybody that has a Gmail account can definitely utilize Google to its capabilities because, you know, within that you can share documents across the drive. You can utilize calendars. You can have access to calendars. You can share photos, documents. There are spreadsheets in there. You can use Google Slides. So Google can be a friend because it's a tool that can help you apply some of these project management tools to manage your entire project. But there's also other project management apps, and I don't really see, I haven't really gone into great detail with all of them because I've only maintained several of them, but there are many other collaboration programs that are out there that will help you along the way. And I would just encourage you, as I know proposal is coming up and I know that we are entering the season, take into consideration, you know, the holiday season, take into consideration your work schedules, take into consideration what are the next milestones moving forward, and start to develop and work together to produce a successful team and a product. And so with that, I will bring this to a close. If you have any questions, I would encourage you to go ahead and ask or just even reach out to me. And I know that there are mentors and advisors on the call that will be able to guide you along the way as well. So thank you. And Christine?
Phenomenal job, Orson. Thank you so much. What a great presentation with lots of tools, etc. I mean, I just went on the last page from all the resources you had, and I thought, oh, I'm going to try and look in one of those. So it even helped me. So at this time, as Orson said, does anybody have questions for Orson or anybody on the team about project management or some of the things that were said? Well, if not, I know we had one question during the chat that had nothing to do with project management, but it was a question about dual deploy. And we is it single or dual deploy for the Moon Challenge? And I do believe I answered correctly in that it is dual deploy for the Moon Challenge, correct? All right. Anybody? We will make, go ahead.
Now's the time.
We will make the PowerPoint available on the website, right, Danielle? Perfection. And you can reach out to any one of us if you have questions or need more suggestions or ideas about the information that Orson presented to us. And with that being said, is somebody trying to talk? I keep getting like a shh, making sure somebody isn't trying to talk that I missed. No? Okay. On that note, everybody have a great night. Thank you, Orson, so much. It's always a pleasure to see you. Everybody be safe. And we look forward to, I should say, Danielle, do you know when the next one is? Do you have it on the calendar by any chance?
Yes, our next webinar is on December 3rd, and that's going to be your preliminary design review development webinar. But before that, you do have some stuff due, so make sure you're keeping an eye on the calendar. You have acceptance materials due, as well as your proposal and budget, and I believe that's due next week, so right around the corner.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Thanks a lot.
everybody. Have
Thanks,
a great
Orson.
evening.
Thank you all.